Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USAPrepares.com. We're delighted you're here. We broadcast 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. It's freezing here. It's 25 degrees. I just got back from saying hi to the cows and feeding them 1,000 pounds of hay. That's a good start for the morning, and we'll do it several times throughout the day. If you'd like to call us, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. If you'd like to dial the listen line, 24/7, 605-477-3249. John's engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. I'm delighted to be broadcasting with Julia Schopick, honestmedicine.com. Welcome, Julia.
Hello, how are you, Vincent? It's so good to be back. I thought you'd never ask again.
Well, I'll tell you what. I was telling our engineer, John, I was telling him about our first event together and how...
Oh, God. Go on.
Yeah.
Well, now tell everybody.
So I had met Julia Schopick on the phone, and the reason I met her was I had a friend and a coworker who had MS, and I thought there's got to be something we can do to help this lady. And so I sought out information on the internet and found Julia Schopick in her book called Honest Medicine. And so I invited her to participate in the Get Prepared Expo, USA Prepares Expo in the early days. And so we decided we would do a teleseminar because she's in Illinois. And so we would do a teleseminar, and I did very few teleseminars, one with James Wesley Rawls and one with Julia Schopick. And so we were in the seminar room, standing room only. The seminar was packed. People were really anxious to hear what she had to say. And so we started the teleseminar. I was in the front of the room, and I introduced Julia, and then Mrs. Finelli ran in, and she said, "We've got an emergency. Someone just collapsed at the expo." And I happened to have I was the MC of the event, and I had the PA system microphone in my jacket pocket, my sports coat. And I said, "Julia, I got to go.
And you
we
said,
have an emergency.
Take it away."
We've got emergency. You're on your own."
Oh, wow.
And what you didn't see, Julia, was there was a gentleman in the classroom, the seminar room, and he jumped in and took my place. He just figured that, okay, there was no briefing for him. I just said, "Here's what's going on. I've got to go right now." Very brief. He ran up, took my place, and worked with you. And to this day, I don't know who he is.
Yeah, I don't either. He was terrific, though.
Isn't that nice? And then, so I got out on the PA system, and I called over the PA system in the convention hall for Dr. Shealy, Dr. Wallach. We had a few nurses. Julie Penick was there. She's a nurse practitioner. And we had several others, Dr. Howard Shane, and he's a dentist. And we called for help, and help arrived about 45 minutes later after this man was patched up. We had an emergency room doctor there, It was really, really great how everybody jumped in. So we took care of our own with our own, and it really worked well. And by the time the ambulance came, the man said, "No, I'm fine. I'm okay now. Thanks anyway." But that was our first event together. It was great that everyone was able to pull off his or her share, and I want to thank you for that.
Well,
so today, yeah,
I was a bit shocked, but it went well. So I enjoyed myself, and I'm glad to be back.
Yeah. And well, here's another part that you may not have heard about that story. At the same time, there was a guy who decided he was going to broadcast live from our expo, and he was on the air, and on his regular radio show. It was a Saturday radio show, and I got on the PA system, which was the loudest sound in the room. And I made the announcement that we needed help from doctors. And at the same time, Dr. Shealy was being interviewed by this man. And after it was all over, he said, "Vinny, what are you thinking? I'm on the radio and you're talking and you're interrupting my radio show." And he was livid. He was livid with me because I responded to this emergency.
Oh, Lord.
Well, so suffice it to say, he was never invited back.
Oh, Lord.
So, Julia, there's a story about your grandmother, and I'd love you to tell that story if you would.
Okay.
Who she was, you never met her.
Go on.
You never met her?
No.
What is that story?
The story is, Vincent, and by the way, one of the reasons that I like to tell the story is that there are two events, or three events actually, that turned me into a patient advocate and into, writing my book, into writing Honest Medicine, but that turned me into looking at the medical profession in a particular way, which I'm sure we'll get to in this hour together. But you're asking now about one of the stories, and it's true, is about my grandmother. And her name was Julia also. So even though I never met her, she died before I was born. I love to tell this true story about Grandma Julia. In 1928, she was told by Dr. Charles Mayo, I'm sure that name Mayo is known to your listeners. Dr. Charles Mayo told her and my grandfather that she had 6 months to live. She had colon cancer. And my grandfather, I must have taken after him and my father, because my grandfather said, like hell, this is not going to happen. And he consulted the newspaper. It's called the Jewish Daily Forwards, that he had helped start. He was one of the founders. And there was a doctor named Dr. Chmielewski who wrote a column, and this is incredible. We're talking 1928, Vincent. A column about treatments for serious illnesses that were being done in Europe, not in the United States. And one of the treatments that Dr. Chmielewski wrote about was a treatment in Germany, and it looked very promising for my grandmother. And my grandfather messaged Dr. Chmielewski. I guess in that time he called him, and they found out that it was a possibility. And my grandmother went to Germany with my Uncle Marco, who spoke fluent German, and she went for treatment. And the thing that happened was that she came back from Germany. Remember, she was supposed to have only lived 6 months, right? She came back from Germany looking as my mother. Oh, I forgot to tell you, my mother was 11 years old at this point, so she would have been left without a mother. Grandma Julia came back from Germany looking great, looking better than my mother had ever seen her look. And she lived 11 more years. And, of course, the doctors in the United States were embarrassed. I mean, they were puzzled. They were embarrassed. They had her looked over by all these famous doctors. Some of them, by the way, this will sound familiar to your listeners, they decided, well, she probably had never had cancer to begin with, but trust me, she had. And she lived 11 more years. And this is the best part. She ended up, every year, she would send a holiday card to Dr. Mayo, and every year he responded until he died. He died a few months before she did. So she outlived the doctor who told her she was going to die. And this is interesting. She lived 11 years. My mother had been 11 when my Grandma Julia was diagnosed. So my mom was now 22 when her mother died. Quite a difference, you know. So, by the way, I hate to tell you what the treatment was that she got in Germany, because you're going to find out that they were ahead of even where we are now in cancer treatment. It was radiation, but it was radiation combined with oxygen so that it wasn't as damaging. This is all I can figure out. You know, obviously I couldn't have talked to Dr. Slimanitsky and the doctor in Frankfurt, you know. But people that I've told the story to who know cancer treatment have said that probably the addition of oxygen with the radiation had probably made it less toxic, which was why my Grandma Julia did not suffer the side effects of the radiation. So this is one of the stories of how I became a patient advocate. I guess it's how I began to suspect that maybe the medical system doesn't always have the answers, you know. So that's a great story, I think.
Yeah, and the medical system also makes mistakes by the decimal.
Yes.
Which is, and I've seen medical mistakes. I've seen mistakes by the decimal. I've seen a patient get an injection of blood pressure medicine a decimal point off, 10 times the dose, drove the blood pressure down to not quite zero, but, you know, almost zero, where the patient almost died right in front of my eyes.
You know
and,
what?
Of course, do they admit it and say,
no.
Oh, here's what I did? Oh, no.
No.
They act like
that has a
happened.
name. It's called death by decimal, and it's horrible. No, the doctors don't admit it, and you caught the doctors doing that. I caught them also
Absolutely.
doing that. Me too.
Absolutely. I caught a nurse overdosing my son with fentanyl, and I said, no, he doesn't want it. He doesn't want the pain meds. He doesn't want it. She had this bolus. She squeezed it, overdosed him. He coded right in front of my eyes, and I was out in the hallway screaming, code blue, code blue. And finally, and the nurse denied it, right in the room where the doctors were trying to revive my son. Nurse denied it. The doctor believed me, used Narcan, revived him. Long story. Julie Schopick's with us. And Julie, your dad, Dr. Lou Schopick, was a medical doctor, and what were his thoughts on modern medicine?
Oh my goodness! And let's define modern at this point, because my dad practiced medicine in the 60s and 70s. He died in the late 70s, and he was a doctor who, by the way, was trained in Switzerland, which may have had an influence on how he viewed medicine. But you bring it up because my dad, Dr. Lou Schopick, was another one of my influences that turned me into a patient advocate and caused me to write my book, to write Honest Medicine. But my dad, as you pointed out, was a doctor, and he was a generalist. He was a general practitioner. They called it a GP in those days, and not a specialist. And he loved being a doctor. And he did not like his fellow doctors in the main. He had a few people he liked who were his fellow doctors, but he did not like his fellow doctors or the way medicine was going. He said that even then it was mainly all about money. He would come in and he would say, and you know how when you're a kid, Vincent, you think your dad is full of you know what, right? And he would come in and say, you know, I just saw Mrs. So-and-so lose her left breast because Doc so-and-so needed a new car. And I was like, come on, no. One day I said, Dad, why do you talk this way about your fellow doctors? He said, I am not kidding. Why? Who the heck would joke about something like this? And he proceeded to go on and tell me how medicine was all about money, and that he saw unnecessary procedures being done, And then he said, and this is the thing I always like to tell people, he said someday, he foresaw managed care is what he did. He said someday people are going to come along and rein these SOBs in, talking about his fellow doctors. He said, unfortunately, those SOBs are going to be worse than our SOBs. So he foresaw managed care coming in and reining the doctors in. But the whole point that he was making is it was always about money, and it will always be about money. And my dad, to the contrary, loved being a doctor. He did not care about money particularly. He was one of the few people, when Medicare came into existence, he was able to make money. And let me explain, not by cheating Medicare, but by being able to charge people he never would have charged because they couldn't afford it. So he said, oh, my goodness, I can make $10 on this test because the patient won't have to pay. He would charge patients who could afford it, but not if they could not afford it. And one thing he said, he was also against, he said the area of specialization, it was just starting. And his fellow doctors, were making fun of him for not wanting to become a specialist. He loved knowing the whole patient, going to their homes, visiting with them. And his fellow doctors would say, Lou, you're not going to make a lot of money this way. And he said, the specialists are getting, this was in, again, the 60s and 70s. It's ridiculous, he would say. They only understand the body part that they have studied. So his famous quote, made famous by me, Vincent, is, my dad used to say, things are getting so specialized that one day there will be a doctor of the big toe. And I'm afraid that has come to pass. There are actually doctors who are specialists in the left hand, specialists in the right hand. As you know, doctors are just specialists in the little area that they know. And my dad was one of the first practitioners of, some of the doctors back there who would go to people's homes. They liked to know about the whole patient. My dad used to love visiting patients in their homes. He would say, you can learn more about the patient in his home or her home than you can when they come to the office. So he was another one of my influences. The third influence, of course, was when my husband, at the age of 40, was diagnosed with a cancerous brain tumor. But that was the story of my dad. Dr. Lou Schopick. So thank you for letting me tell that. I love to tell that story.
I really appreciate that. And you hit on a very important point. I remember being in a doctor's office with another patient. I was just a driver. And it's clear that the doctors, the nurse practitioners, the nurses have no idea about the living arrangements of their patients. No idea whether it's roach-infested, animal-infested, or pristine. They have no idea.
Nope.
That's a really good point, and your father did. We'll be right back. Julia Schopick's with us, honestmedicine.com, and her books are available on Amazon. And there's a link, page 1, usaprepares.com, page 1. There's a post, and you can find links to this broadcast with Julia, other broadcasts with Julia and me, and a link to her website. Julia, my dad once said, actually he probably said it many times, that he was talking about specialization, and he said that's the process of learning more and more about less and less until you know absolutely everything there is to know about nothing.
Exactly.
I think he was right.
So your dad agreed with my dad?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, he saw it.
I'm sorry. Go on, Vincent.
Yeah, he saw it. And, I was thinking about your dad as a GP, a general practitioner, and I think about veterinarians. And, sometimes, veterinarians get treated as if they are not as good as medical doctors. And then a veterinarian might say, well, you guys only specialize in the nose or the ear or the eye. We have to specialize on many, many different animals and all of the body.
Yep.
So,
and you know what? Will Rogers, the comedian of long ago, once said that the veterinarian is much, much smarter than the human doctor because the veterinarian's patients can't tell them what's wrong,
That's absolutely right. And by the way, we have several veterinarians here at USA Prepares, and they are absolutely delightful, brilliant, compassionate, and I just love broadcasting with them. Julia, let's talk about multiple sclerosis. I have a friend whose mother has MS, and it's kind of frightening if a person has that, the debilitating disease, loss of motor skills, and so forth. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you're getting to my book, To Honest Medicine, because it's about several treatments, and 4 treatments to be exact, that doctors do not know about and that I am passionate about getting the word out about. And one of them is low-dose naltrexone. And low-dose naltrexone is a very, as the word says, low dose of another drug, naltrexone, that was FDA approved for another reason entirely in 1984. That's the background, and I've gone through the background very, very quickly. It's actually a very long, interesting story that I tell in Honest Medicine. But low-dose naltrexone started to be used in the 1980s. Dr. Bernard Bahari, who was the, quote, inventor of low-dose naltrexone. Remember I said it was FDA approved as naltrexone in 1984 at 50 milligrams. That's 50. And this brilliant doctor, Dr. Bahari, found that it was not very good. It was developed at 50 milligrams to stop addicts from getting high. They would take the naltrexone in the morning or at evening, whichever, and the next day they would not have the craving for the opiate, for the heroin, even if they took the heroin. But he found that it was toxic at that high dose. But he also found that at very low doses, it really was wonderful for autoimmune diseases. The first one that he tried it on had multiple sclerosis. And I tell that story because the MS patients, multiple sclerosis patients, have taken low-dose naltrexone on as a cause. There are now thousands of patients with MS who have been, their diseases are not reversed. I just want to say that. One of the reasons I want to get the word out about low-dose naltrexone is that it stops the progression of a large number of people with multiple sclerosis, and their doctors will not tell them about it. It's a shame. But how far along is your friend's mother? How long has she had MS?
I don't know the particulars. I really don't. I've never met this gal's mom. I've just heard the story, and I thought, there's some options. And I don't think she's getting treatment that is viable.
Well, the bad part is, I wouldn't be so passionate about talking about the treatments in my book, in Honest Medicine. They're all treatments for which the medical profession does not have, for the conditions, does not have very good treatments. For instance, let's take MS. The treatments that are out there are very, very toxic, very expensive. And, they don't work with a lot of patients. There's 2 of them that have a side effect, are you ready for this, of a brain infection that can lead to death. It's called PML. I don't have the whole long word in front of me, but it's a brain infection. And doctors give this drug, and it's infused. They have to go to chemotherapy centers to get this drug infused. It's expensive, $60,000 a year, and can cause death. Whereas low-dose naltrexone costs about $1 a day. It is not covered by insurance, but it costs less than your copay for these other dangerous drugs. And by the way, I don't mean to say that these drugs that are so toxic never work on anybody. They do. But not, it's at a terrible expense in many cases. And I mean emotional, physical, and financial. So I try to get the word out. By the way, I'm writing another book now, totally with a co-author named Don Schwartz, and it's totally about low-dose naltrexone. And I have stories in there in Honest Medicine, the stories, I urge your friend's mother to get Honest Medicine, to read the wonderful stories in there by people who had MS, multiple sclerosis, and are doing much better thanks to low-dose naltrexone or LDN. My book that's coming up is going to have stories of, are you ready for this? Lupus, Parkinson's, Crohn's, all of these autoimmune conditions, Hashimoto's, I mean, just on. And it's going to have stories from people from other countries, too, because low-dose naltrexone is becoming famous. If you go on Facebook, which I know you're on, Vincent, there are 15 LDN Facebook groups, low-dose naltrexone Facebook groups, several of them in foreign countries like Italy, France, the Netherlands. And this is very exciting stuff, in my opinion. You know what is so good? The Internet is making it so that people are finding treatments that their doctors are not telling them about. Don't even ask your doctor about LDN. He or she won't know about it and will be very skeptical. There's a chapter in Honest Medicine in my book where Dr. Bert Berkson, tells about how doctors are just not curious in most cases. They're trained and not educated. They're not educated to think outside the box and to be curious. So I urge your friend's mother to look outside the box, unless she's one of the people who is doing well. But you know what? I still, the phrase, doctor do no harm? Well,
Sure.
I think that going with the less toxic drug first is probably a wonderful idea.
Well, that's something Dr. Norman Shealy, who's on the air with me every Wednesday for 2 hours and has been for years, over 5 years, I think. He advocates, taking the least damaging course of action, always the least offensive, the least toxic, the most safe, always.
Well, he uses LDN. I know that he does.
As a matter of fact, I put you in touch with him.
You did. He definitely uses it. And you know what? Loads of doctors, I don't mean to sound so negative, because loads of doctors are using it. The problem is, though, that they can't be really open about it. And everybody says, oh, they're afraid of being sued. No. They're afraid that their fellow doctors will make will come down on them, for doing something that's outside the standard of care. It's very sad. But the good news is that patients, because of the Internet, are banding together. They're educating each other. And I even have a program, if any of your listeners are interested in convincing your doctor to let you try LDN for an autoimmune disease. I do coaching to tell you how to educate your doctor, because patients will go in and say, oh, I heard this woman, I forget her name, I think it's Schopick or something, and she wrote this book, I forget its name, but it says about this LDN. What do you know about it? Now, the doctor's going to say that sounds terrible,
Right.
So I teach people how to approach your doctor, what materials to share with them, because doctors will be more open sometimes if you know how to approach them.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Parkinson's. One of our instructors has Parkinson's. She has called in a number of times to this broadcast, and she announced or told a story about her Parkinson's and discussed it with Dr. Norman Shealy. And I'm going to give her a call after the broadcast and tell her she might want to listen to this and pick up a copy of your book.
You know
and that
what?
book is called Honest Medicine.
Honest Medicine. And I have to tell you, maybe I should mention some of the other conditions. Did you know, Vincent, that there are over 100 autoimmune diseases that have been identified at this point? Given the food that we eat and the air that we breathe, more and more autoimmune diseases are coming out. But Crohn's disease has had wonderful results with low-dose naltrexone. Rheumatoid arthritis, chronic fatigue, cases of asthma, because there can be an autoimmune component. One of the stories in my upcoming book is about a woman with lupus who she took 35 years before she finally was given low-dose naltrexone. And the man with Crohn's disease, it almost makes me cry when I tell you, 50 years after he was diagnosed with Crohn's, he found and took low-dose naltrexone and got better. So there are loads of, if people would like a link to all of the names of diseases that are autoimmune, write to me at Julia at Honest Medicine, and in the subject line put link to autoimmune disease list.
And Julia, when we come back after these few short commercial announcements, would you tell us some more of the diseases, the autoimmune diseases on this list? Crohn's, rheumatoid arthritis, asthma, lupus. I mean, so many people are on rescue inhalers. It's unbelievable. And I'm hearing more about Crohn's and arthritis. Let's talk about that when we come back. Julia Schopick's with us. Class, I posted page 1 of USA Prepares several links, and it has Julia Schopick's name, and you can listen to her broadcast with me. You can listen, or you can find the link to Amazon right there, and the link to her website. And Julia, the cost of your book is $14.95 at Amazon. On Kindle, it's $8.99. Now, as far as I can tell, that's about 1/10 the cost of going to visit a physician. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I wanted to say something else, and that is that if you look at the price of other books, you'll find that it's 300 pages, 310 pages to be exact. I purposely priced it lower than the going rate. For books that long and with that much research involved, and that much work, because I wanted people to be able to afford it who have illnesses, and it's worked out. People are buying it and they're loving it, but I don't think they would have bought it as quickly if it had been more expensive. Yes, it's about the 1/10 of a cost of visiting a doctor. And you asked about the diseases that might be helped.
Yes.
I like to tell people, I have a list for myself of, because I'm asked this question, of the diseases that most people know about. But I do have a list also, as I said, if people wanted, of tons of diseases, over 100 that LDN, that are autoimmune and LDN could work on. But here are just some of them: psoriasis, asthma, Crohn's disease that we mentioned before, Hashimoto's and Graves' thyroiditis, which are both thyroid autoimmune diseases, lupus, myasthenia gravis, chronic fatigue syndrome, celiac disease, eczema, Haley, HIV, Lyme, Parkinson's, rheumatoid arthritis, sarcoidosis, scleroderma, Sjogren's, vitiligo, and ulcerative colitis. Those are, to me, I hate to use the word popular when talking about diseases, but they're the ones that are probably the most known. But there are many, many, many diseases that if your doctor has said, "Oh my God, it's an autoimmune disease," think of low-dose naltrexone.
And this is not something that you can buy over the counter. You have to go to a medical doctor. Is that correct?
Yes, and not only that, but most doctors won't know about it. I have a list given to me by one of the patient advocates named Crystal Nason. She assiduously worked to collect the names of doctors who will prescribe it. I cannot put it online, but I can give you the names of the doctors in your state who will prescribe it. And here's another thing. It has to be compounded by a compounding pharmacy, and that's a whole other topic. But let me just say that when we were kids, the pharmacists used to compound their drugs. They didn't just get them from the pharmaceutical companies. They would compound them, and this is what compounding pharmacies do. And every compounding pharmacist does not know about low-dose naltrexone. I can get people a list of pharmacists that will compound it correctly. And so,
Julia, how do we get in
on.
touch with you? How do we get in touch with you?
They can write to me at julia@honestmedicine.com. They can get the book at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It's also available in Kindle, Nook, Smashwords. I've tried to make it available to as many people as need it. And they can find me on Facebook, and I have a Facebook page for the book called Julia Schopick Presents Honest Medicine. I love Facebook. We didn't even discuss Facebook. It's my favorite. That and radio.
Julie, I only use Facebook once a day, and before the broadcast, I'll say, here's what we're going to talk about. Here are the instructors for today, and that's it. That's all I use it for. It's kind of one way. I don't use it to show pictures of our dog. It's only for who's going to be on and what we're going to talk about.
Well, I'm glad if I'm on it. I hope I am.
You are.
Okay.
You are. You're on it. Julia, thank you so much for being with us today. And we're going to have to do this again. The phone works both ways. You can call me.
You know I will.
Yep. Julia, thanks so much. HonestMedicine.com. I've got a copy right here in the studio. And if you get one directly from Julia, ask her to autograph it for you. That's what I have.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Julia.
Thank you.
Hour number 2 is coming up. Kurt Wilson, guns, ammo, reloading. And what happened to the 22s? That's what I want to know. And we're going to find out right after the top of the hour. Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Hour number 2 of USAPrepares.com. I'm delighted to be broadcasting with Kurt Wilson, Survival Enterprises. On the web, se1.us, SE, the number 1.us. Welcome, Kurt.
Hey, Vinny, what's happening?
Well, I was thinking, many years ago, I was at the Chinese factory outlet in Virginia. It's also known as Walmart. And I was going to teach some scouts how to shoot with a rifle safely, carefully, accurately. And so I went into the Chinese factory outlet, and there were these milk cartons of ammunition in milk carton-like packages, Federal 22 long rifle cartridges. And the price, I believe, was $7.97 for 550 rounds. So I bought a few of them, and I remember the guy behind the counter looking at me, and he said, "Wow, you gonna start your own war with these?"
That's one afternoon's target practice.
Well, that's kind of what I said. I said, no. If I were, I certainly wouldn't be using these. And no, we're going to go through a box of these in a very, very short time. And I plan on teaching some scouts and some young people how to shoot, and carefully and safely and accurately and so forth. But it was interesting that his take was that I was buying so much ammunition. But, you get a bunch of scouts together and it goes pretty quickly. Anyway, here's my question for you. I know that you spend some time studying and have in the past have studied firearms, ammunition, reloading, and so forth. $7.97 for 550 rounds. I know that I've been to gun shows since then, and that same size box or smaller is selling for between $59 and $79 for that same size box of ammunition or smaller. What has happened to 22 long rifles? What's happened? That's the cartridge of choice for most people who begin learning how to shoot, right? Isn't that the one?
Yeah. Let me go back to when I was just a young whippersnapper. When I was a kid, I grew up on a reservation, Klamath Indian Reservation, and the trading post there. The guy was. We didn't have a lot of money. I mean, nobody had a lot of money. A $5 bill was a lot of money. So on his counter, he would roll cigarettes himself, and he'd have them in a bowl, and he'd sell them for a penny apiece. And the bowl next to it were 22 long rifle bullets at a penny apiece. Mm-hmm. And every time I'd go in there with my nickel so I could buy 5 bullets to go hunting for food, I'd hear somebody complaining because that's a damn ripoff. You want 50 cents a box basically for 22 ammo, and it was 12 and a half cents or 12 cents or something for a box at that time. Well, times change. When I was in high school, I used to walk to school carrying my 22 rifle, and this is Hiram Johnson High School in Sacramento, and they had a gun range there where every to graduate you had to have 1 semester of firearm safety, and you would go in there and you would shoot, and they'd go through thousands of rounds a day.
Sure.
Okay, so over time, and when I say over time, I mean as more and more communists, socialists, Democrats, I call them Demunists on my radio show, gain control of politics, they realize that not everybody is as stupid as they want them to be, so they have to control us. I mean, that's the whole goal of the Demunists is 100% control of the population. Because, after all, we are too stupid to raise our own children, run with scissors, have guns, dogs, that kind of thing. So they have to find these back doors into controlling us. And they would do certain things. And in the 70s and 80s, these things were government regulations. And they started increasing environmental protection laws because it's for the children, don't you know? So they controlled what kind of gas you could get because it puts out, if they use leaded gas, it puts out really bad smog. And then they controlled what kind of drugs you can get and what kind of food you can get and where you can get it. And it goes on and on and on and on. I remember, and I bet you do too, when Adolf Clinton took power and his henchman, Al Gore, they decided to do what they could to hamstring us evil, right-wing, homophobic patriots. Now, this might sound a far-fetched thing. Remember Strike Anywhere matches?
Sure.
Okay. Using Strike Anywhere matches, I can make explosives, I can reload ammunition, I can make primers out of it, I can do all kinds of things with it. And it took a certain amount of control away from us when Al Gore, he couldn't come right out and ban those. This really sounds like a far-fetched stretch, but this is true. He wanted to ban them. His job, one of his jobs, was to do everything he could to hamstring patriots so that they couldn't store food, they couldn't accumulate certain weapons, they couldn't, all of these things. This was something, for some stupid reason, he fixated on. Mm-hmm. So when my company, Survival Enterprises, we used to sell these, and we would buy a pallet load, and we would sell them to people. It was not a big deal. I used them because I started fires with them, and we heated with them, and I used them all over the place. And I kept them for emergency purposes. And all of a sudden, I got a notice that they're not banned, but now they're hazardous materials. So every shipment, and that, even if it's one box, had a $55 hazmat fee on it. Overnight, all of the mom and pop stores said, well, the hell with that. I only use 12 boxes a month, so I'm not paying the extra $55 for those. I'll get the strike on box matches, the safety matches, they call them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, I didn't care because I buy a pallet at a time anyway. But that was the from my viewpoint, the actual beginning of where this shadow government was going. And when I say shadow government, I mean EPA, FBI, ATF, IRS, all of those alphabet soup agencies. So all of these agencies started putting out rules and regulations to protect us, okay? Protect us, or the one-eyed, backward hopping frog guppy in the slough in California. So they had to stop taking water out of the slough so the farmers could have water. So they had to stop doing that because those creatures were endangered now. It gets really insane in some of these areas. Like they shut down all the farmers in the Klamath area because of this kind of EPA crap. They wouldn't allow them to have water to grow their crops. A quarter of the crops on the western United States were destroyed because the government said this indigenous frog is more important than human life. So, and it goes on and on and on from there. And there's many facets. They have these psychotics are in the swamp. This is what Trump wants to drain, the swamp. These psychotics or these demunists have been staffing these agencies for the past 50 years. And they all have the same goal, one way or another, to gain complete control of the population. For our own good, mind you, for our own good.
Do you think part of the reason for the 22 long rifle being so hard to find at a reasonable price, and I don't know what a reasonable price is, but going from the 1 cent per cartridge that you're talking about, I remember them at 50 cents per box of 50, same price you're talking about. I remember that. Going to $10.
Oh yeah,
$5 a box. 10 times the price.
So here's what happened. Here's what happened. And now understand, people have to understand it. It doesn't matter who the president is because the swamp controls our lives. The shadow government, the alphabet soup agencies control our lives. With Clinton, they started passing these EPA regulations on coal plants and coal-fired electricity generating plants and train engines, and they've started passing requirements for putting carbon emissions into the air. So Procter & Gamble in Sacramento, they would do a run on some kind of soap, and in the morning you'd wake up and the air would taste soapy, okay? Nobody ever got hurt by this. Nothing ever got in any way, shape, or form harmed. But the government passed a regulation that they're putting too many toxins into the air. And they had to install inline catalytic converters that would reburn everything that they exhausted. That cost them $23 million to do that. So that plant went out of business. But that's the idea. The government wanted to shut down as much business in the United States as possible. This is a long-term conspiracy. They want to shut down as much business as possible in the United States, so we have to rely on other countries for whatever we want. One point, about 10 years ago, a friend of mine who was a reloader told me that he was having a hard time getting lead to reload with. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, I always get my lead at the tire store. Wait.
Yeah.
A new federal law prohibited reselling that lead. It has to go to a recycler.
Outrageous. Absolutely outrageous.
And I got more.
Kurt Wilson and I will be right back after these commercial announcements. Kurt Wilson's with us, and we're talking about lead. And Kurt, I've got a tire changing machine here at the farm. And, I was thinking that I could use some extra weights, and I was thinking about going to a big tire shop and buying a bucket of weights so I could put them on my equipment here, using the used weights, bending the tabs over and use them. So are you saying that that's against the law? I can't buy used tire weights?
There is a regulation out there that forbids tire companies from reselling used weights. Okay? I'm serious. It's an actual law. It doesn't mean that they all follow it. Uh-huh. Okay? But there is a law. Now, this is why, and this was invented in China, they have the self-adhesive lead weights.
Right.
Right? And those are usually used for expensive mags and wheels that you don't want to mar by beating on those weights. But anyway, so this guy was telling me, now realize I was a master gunsmith for 25 years. And so I dealt with a lot of reloading equipment and a lot of lead and things like that. And when this guy tells me this, I'm thinking, you're full of crap. That's anti-American, man. You can't reuse those weights. So you have a lead weight and you have a steel clamp, this is what they clamp on and beat down with a hammer, and those lose tension and fall off if you try and reuse them. So the government came out and they tried to say, well, we're forcing you not to reuse old weights because that's a consumer problem, and we're protecting the consumer. And everybody called BS on that. So then they came out and said, oh, it's a hazard to the environment. Okay, so there's that. But what was happening was that those were all going back to be recycled, to be used in other things, including making some ammunition. Mm-hmm. So And remember how the deminists work, back door. They don't go through the front door, because if they did, people would say, you guys are out of your frickin' mind. So they always backdoor these things. So they started, some years back, 5, 6, 7 years, you start hearing about how the Department of Homeland Nazis are buying up loads of ammunition. Not just, a few thousand rounds or a few million rounds, but billions of rounds of ammunition. And it started to get a little short here in the United States. And people are saying, it's the ammunition is getting harder to find in the U.S. because the government's buying it all up. Well, yes and no. These EPA laws were affecting metal smelting plants throughout the United States, especially the lead smelters. Mm-hmm. The ones that made the big 50 and 100-pound ingots that ammo manufacturers would buy and use. And the very last lead smelter closed December last year. Doe Run in Missouri.
Yeah, I called them.
Yeah.
I called them up. I called them up just before they were going to shut down. And I said, I identified myself. I said who we are, what we do. And I would like to go public with their story. And I'd like to stop this because I consider it a threat to our national security, not having lead smelters. And they were the last big one. They absolutely were. And they're within, 100 and something miles of our farm. And they said, no, we've worked it out with the EPA. We're good with our, decision, and, we're going to shut down. We're okay with it.
And what they didn't, and there's a little bit more to it than that, but yeah, the last major lead smelter shut down in the United States in December of last year due to the EPA regulations. Now, what they didn't tell you is that the government allowed them to continue smelting lead for specific other purposes as long as it wasn't to supply ammunition manufacturers. So that's where that's sitting. So now we have to get our lead from China. And you're finding, but there's pros and cons on that, all right? What you're finding now is people are coming up with really ingenious replacements for lead in bullets, which, sadly enough to the government, makes these bullets 10 to 100 times more lethal, such as frangible copper that explodes on contact.
Let's talk about that when we come back. And ultimately, let's weave into this reloading as well. What do we do? What can we do? Kurt Wilson's with us. SE1, the number 1.us, the website. Kurt, you said something very interesting. You talked about ingenious ways around the lead problem, and you mentioned frangible. So, class, frangible means that it breaks up into fragments. It doesn't deform. So here's an example. If you take a slice of American cheese and you hold that one slice in your hand, you can bend it and deform it. You compare that to a saltine cracker, which will crumble. That's what Kurt Wilson's talking about. So when a person gets hit by one of these frangible bullets, these little fragments go everywhere, and it's a surgeon's nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a better example would be, those chocolate orange confections you buy. They're wrapped. They're the size. They're a small ball, and they're wrapped. And you open it up, and there's like slices in there of an orange. That's you eat with chocolate coating. That's what a frangible bullet looks like. It's pre-broken up and then compressed back together. When Regan was shot, and that other idiot was shot also, that's the ammunition that was used, and that's why it was so deadly. The guy used a .22 caliber to shoot Regan. The 22, by the way, has been, and this is kind of an odd statistic, but the .22 caliber long rifle has been used in the majority of successful assassinations throughout the world. So never underestimate the power of a well-placed .22 caliber, a little 40
I can tell you,
gram.
I can tell you that we have a neighbor who, when he wants to butcher a cow, will shoot the cow in the head with a 22. I'm talking about a 1,000-pound animal, takes him down with a 22.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the whole thing. This is why lead has gotten so out of hand, because of the EPA, the government. They've controlled the manufacturing of it, and now it has to be imported. Now, just to let people know, you can go on eBay, and you can find some people who don't know about the law, and they'll put the lead up. They'll put their used weights up on eBay. But you're looking, now you understand the weight also has the steel clamp still in it. And this is called hard lead. This is the perfect stuff to cast bullets out of. You're going to pay about $3 a pound for this stuff, when in reality it should have been 50 cents a pound. I used to buy them and make weights for fishing.
Well, I'm at eBay right now, and you're absolutely right. I'm looking at lead weights by the bucket.
Yeah, well, most of those buckets you're going to see will say steel only, iron only. In other words, they already took the lead off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, so but still, that's one of the problems, and that's what's happening. Lead's getting hard to get, and I've been telling people this for a dozen years. When you see something that you want, when it comes to munitions, do yourself a favor. Don't sit there and go, I wonder if I can get it cheaper elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Just buy the damn thing, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Vince and I were talking about reloading equipment and how it's got expensive and all that. But you know something, folks? Yeah. Yard sale season's coming up. Flea market season's coming up. And there's always eBay and Craigslist. And you can find so many things on there. You know, there's always somebody who says, I'm going to reload my ammunition and save money. And then they screw it up so bad that they just say, hell with it, and they sell it. Their press and their powder and their holes and their empty shells and the primers, and they sell all of that stuff at a dime on the dollar. But you got to be the first worm there.
Mm-hmm. What do you recommend if someone wants to get into reloading? Is there a caliber that makes sense, that's easy or readily available, affordable, a good value, and then base the rifle or the pistol on that?
Well,
like for example, 38.
Yeah. Well, to tell you the truth, I used to target shoot the competition 357 Magnum. Mm-hmm. I hand loaded my ammo. Lee makes a little portable reloading kit. I mean, you can slip this kit into your shirt pocket. This is what I recommend if you're going to reload something. For survival, that's what I recommend. I mean, if you want to say do 1,000 rounds in an afternoon, you're going to need a Lee press or a Macmillan press. You're going to need a press, you're going to need all this big equipment. I always did everything by hand because I literally weighed the grain of powder I was using. I would file the bullets down to make sure they weighed all the same. And it's a very simple thing. You just sit there and watching TV on the coffee table, reloading your ammo, as long as you remember when to knock the primer out and when to put the primer in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at Craigslist right now, and I see a MEC reloading press, and that'd be for a shotgun. I see one of those. I see some bullets available. Not as much as I'd like to see. I see a Hornady press, but if I guess if we're thinking that there are going to be hundreds of these available for sale, I don't think that's the case right at the moment. But,
well, I'm looking at, of course, I'm up in North Idaho. I'm looking at an RCBS Rock Chucker and powder trickler, a Dillon RL550.
Well, that sounds great.
Lyman. Yeah, linotype. And now here's another thing. If you call presses, newspapers, and say, "Do you have any old linotype?" They used lead, that's hard lead, to make the press to stamp out the newspapers. Sometimes they'll have it. So I'm looking at brass.
Yeah, I remember years ago. They sold the drawers out of the linotype cabinets. Yeah, and you're right. They sold those by the piece, and what a great idea if you can still find it.
Mm-hmm. Just okay. And as an aside, and it has nothing to do with this in any way, shape, or form. We're talking about newspapers. The newspapers have what's called end rolls. This is the newsprint, and it's about 3 foot wide. You'll take a newspaper and open it up. That's how wide their rolls of newsprint is. It's white paper, and they sell these rolls, these end rolls, and you can get like 100 feet on there for $5. That's what we used to use for my kid. He was homeschooled, and they could draw on it and all of this. So I just thought I'd throw that out.
Yeah, we used to buy them as well. You're absolutely right. It's like a butcher roll of paper, except 3 feet wide, and it's too short for them to run the newspaper, but it's certainly plenty for other purposes. Great idea, and there's no printing on it. It's just newspaper on a roll, big roll. Yeah. Great idea. If we were,
go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say that if a person wants to start out shooting and learning how, do you have a recommendation? Is there let's say we start with a rifle that would be safe for a young person. What would that be in your mind?
Well, it would be a bolt-action single shot.
Okay.
First gun, cricket. It's a shorter. My son got his first rifle when he was 8 years old, and it was called a cricket, and it was a shorter version of a bolt-action 22 long rifle. And a bolt-action 22, by the way, will shoot shorts, longs, long rifles. It'll shoot any 22 version, not a Magnum, but any 22 version in there, so it doesn't matter. And that way, you teach them placement and precision and responsibility, and they don't go Rambo with that kind of crap.
Right.
So I always recommend a bolt-action single shot. Just single shot, bolt-action, single shot. And then the next step up from there would be either a Marlin tube-fed semi-automatic rifle or a Ruger 10-22. I personally like the Ruger because there's so much you can do with. But
when you talk about the Ruger, you're talking about the Ruger model 10/22. 10/22.
Yep. There's pros and cons on both of these. The tube-fed 22, Marlin, good gun, very accurate. Now realize 22 ammo is the dirtiest ammunition known to man. It is filthy. You shoot a couple hundred rounds out of any gun, and you got to clean it. No ifs, ands, or buts. So you have to clean that Marlin, which you can do. The tube is fine unless you drop the gun and bend and put a little dink in the tube, and then now you can't load it. So and a mag-fed gun, removable magazine like the Ruger 10-22, comes with a 10-shot rotary magazine. If you lose the mag, you're screwed. So both of them have a little pro and con, but always start with a bolt action. And you can find a cricket. And then Marlin, go ahead.
How do you feel about one of my favorite rifles is the lever action 22?
No, I don't recommend it.
Really, you don't? Why?
No.
Why is that?
Cleaning and parts. Yeah. See, in survival, you want to follow the KISS formula. Keep it simple, stupid. A lever action has too many parts. You can get some sand or dirt in that lever action, and it will not function.
Absolutely true.
And if it gets dirty, it will not function. You have three basic versions of lever actions. You have the Savage style, the Savage 99. You have the Marlin, and then you have the Winchester. And the Winchester is when you lower the lever, the whole top strap pulls back. And so it can get really dirty, but it's also easier to extract a fouled round or a problem like that. They're an okay gun, but for a 22, I wouldn't go with a lever action. I'd always go with a semi-automatic or a bolt action.
I have found that the impact from the same round shot out of a Ruger 10-22 versus a Marlin Golden 39, a lever action rifle, the impact of that projectile hits far harder with the lever action than the Ruger. Kurt Wilson's with us, and we're talking about ammunition. We're talking about the first the first rifle. Kurt, so what I did was I took some soft pine boards and I set them up at a target range. And I fired into them with a semi-automatic Ruger 1022. I fired into the same boards with a bolt-action rifle and a lever-action Marlin Golden 39A, longer barrel. And what I found was that the impact was about the same with the bolt-action and the lever-action, but the hitting of the projectile with the semi-automatic didn't penetrate as far. Have you seen the same thing?
Do you know why? Yeah. Do you know why?
Yeah. I do.
Because in the semi-automatic, you're using some of the gases that expel the projectile to cycle the whole action. And that's why snipers use, theoretically, that's why snipers use bolt-action rifles, because they'll hold trajectory better, they have harder hitting capabilities, and they make use 100% of the expelled gases from the exploding cartridge. So
right.
That's fine. But that's not what we were talking about. But you will get a harder hitting. Now, I like a lever action in a 45-70, and you were talking about using the same ammunition for a rifle and a handgun. That's also why I used a 357 Magnum, because I had a Marlin. Now, Marlin is the strongest lever action made. I like a Marlin in 357 Magnum, and I had a Ruger in 357 Magnum, so I could shoot. Now, 38 Special is the same diameter, just about a quarter-inch shorter, so it's cheaper to shoot a 38 Special than it is a 357 Magnum. So I would train with the 38 and use also the 38 hunt and rabbit. But I could, for defense, and if I want to go after a bear or big game, and trust me, you can go after big game with a 357 Magnum. You ain't going to do it at 1,000 yards, but I wouldn't be phased whatsoever going after an 800-pound grizzly with a 357 Magnum.
And what you're talking about is the Marlin lever action 357/38 rifle, correct?
Yep.
That's not the model number of it, but it will. It's a magnificent looking rifle. One of the best looking rifles, I believe, in my opinion, ever made. Beautiful
Checkering on it. Yeah, and it's a great all around gun. It really is.
And I can tell you that Mrs. Finelli has one. and a 357. And for that very, very reason. And we never talked about this. But yes.
We all think alike. Logic is logic. It doesn't matter who uses it.
Yeah. But I got to tell you, from an art perspective, from a beauty perspective, I happen to like wood and steel. I think they are the finest looking rifles made compared to plastic. I just, I've used some plastic and steel, but the wood, the walnut, the checkering, the style, it's timeless.
Oh, yeah.
It's timeless.
I being a master gunsmith, I retired in 2004, I was trained from people who no longer exist, especially in how to work on wood. I can take you. In fact, I used to advertise in the Shotgun News, if you have an ugly, grody, rusted, crummy-looking rifle, pistol, shotgun, give it to me and I'll make it look brand new. And I did. And I could take these crappy-looking wooden stocks that people, like Sears Roebuck, Ted Williams stock that they simply spray-painted brown.
Right.
And I could take them down to the wood and I could pull out the natural grain and you'll swear to God it was a $500 piece of wood.
Yeah.
And I bought the Marlin, beautiful checkering on Marlin rifles, some of the Marlin rifles, especially the 357 mag version. People screw those up bad. And I take them, I hate to say it, I'm not going to try and save the checkering. I sand it down, but then I hand rub it with boiled linseed oil and it pulls out the grain and it's gorgeous.
Are we losing our ability to make beautiful rifles in this country now?
We're losing our ability to give a damn, and that's the problem. Yeah, it's all plastic now.
Yep, very well put, very well put. Kurt Wilson, thanks so much. You can go to this website, SE1, the number one, SE, the number one.us. Kurt, thanks so much for being with us. Class, above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.